On this Sunday night, what did he know and when? The Prime Minister responds to allegations China tried to interfere in Canadian democracy.
But let me be clear.
A gunman terrorizes a gay nightclub.
As I was dancing on the dance floor, I heard shots fired.
The horror and the heroes who put their lives on the line. Deal or no deal? 2 million Ontario students learn whether another strike will cancel classes. And the World Cup kicks off in Qatar.
More and more fans have started to show up.
The controversy, the excitement, and what to expect from Team Canada.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is on a plane headed back to Canada after a 10-day overseas trip, attending a series of summits, including the G20, where tensions between Canada and the Chinese government were in focus. Part of the reason, alleged Chinese interference in our 2019 federal election. Earlier this month, Global News broke the story that intelligence officials had warned the PM in January that China has been allegedly targeting Canada, including funding a clandestine network of 11 federal candidates. Before he boarded, Trudeau says he was never briefed on that. Mackenzie Gray is in Brussels, traveling with the Prime Minister, and has more. Mackenzie.
Farah, they're explosive allegations. The Chinese government attempting to influence and subvert Canadian democracy. And today, the Prime Minister responded to what he knew about those allegations.
Global News was the first to report in January 2022, Canadian intelligence officials delivered a series of sensitive memos and briefs to warn the Prime Minister and select members of his cabinet that CSIS had evidence China ran a sophisticated scheme to influence the 2019 election. These memos detailed a large covert transfer of funds directed by officials in China's Toronto consulate to members of the alleged network, including a federal campaign staffer and provincial politician, according to the intelligence briefs. However, today, Trudeau said he doesn't know the at least 11 federal candidates alleged to be a part of the PCR interference ring, according to information obtained by Global News, nor if they received funds from China.
I do not have any information, nor have I been briefed, on any federal candidates receiving any money from China.
Global News has reported the 11 candidates were part of the alleged network, but there is no evidence that Chinese officials ever directly funded their campaign. Trudeau was less clear when pushed on what other possible briefings or information he had received on the alleged Chinese interference in the 2019 election.
So just to be clear, sir, you learned about all these allegations when Global News first reported it?
These media reports were things that we took seriously, and we asked our security officials to follow up on them, and we have asked them to give all information that they can, to share what they can with the parliamentary committee looking into it. But again, let me be very clear. I have no information, and I get briefed up regularly from our intelligence and security officials. I have no information on any federal candidates receiving money from China.
Sources have told Global News the Prime Minister was given both in-person and written briefings, stating that the alleged Chinese clandestine election interference network in 2019 included at least 11 candidates and 13 staff, but those candidates were not named. Some, but not all of the candidates and staff were witting affiliates of the Chinese Communist Party, the intelligence memos alleged, according to information obtained by Global News.
The Prime Minister says he's directed intelligence officials to give any information on alleged Chinese interference to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, which will probe this issue. But he is yet to say whether he'll testify at the committee like they've requested. Farah?
Mackenzie Gray in Brussels. Thank you, Mackenzie. Parents and students across Ontario have been on pins and needles this weekend, anxiously waiting to find out if school will go ahead tomorrow. The union representing 55,000 education workers in the provincial government had until 5 p.m. Eastern today to negotiate a deal to stop another strike. Our Mike Drolet has been tracking this, and Mike, it looks like they did it.
Yes, Farah, a potential crisis has been averted here in Ontario with a last-second deal that will keep teachers in the classroom. The Santa Claus parade ran by here earlier today with thousands of parents and their kids lining the streets, gritting their teeth, possibly because of the cold, but also the uncertainty over the fact that there is a potential for 55,000 school teachers in this province to go on strike. There was a 5 p.m. deadline set by the union to get a deal, and it went right down to the wire. The sticking points were money. The province had agreed to 15% pay raise over 4 years, And the other issue was workers, which the province balked at, hiring more assistants, more ECEs, more janitors, more secretaries. We're unsure if that is in the new deal. But for now, we can tell you that a last-minute deal has been reached and hopefully ending this contentious and nasty, bitter fight. One last point, though. Today, CUPE did link to the PC website. It's Premier Doug Ford's birthday, his 58th birthday today, and they suggested that its members send him birthday wishes. He might not want to look at those too closely. Farah, back to you.
Mike Drolet in Toronto. Thank you, Mike. What was supposed to be a fun Saturday night out has turned into America's latest deadly mass shooting. A gunman opened fire at a gay nightclub in Colorado, killing at least 5 people and injuring 18 others. A memorial has now been set up outside the club in the city of Colorado Springs, where mourners have been leaving flowers next to a sign that says "Love over hate." One man is now in custody. Jennifer Johnson has one bartender's firsthand account and why some club goers are being called heroes.
The deadly shootings happened just before midnight at the Club Q. Patrons desperately tried to escape as the lone gunman, carrying a long rifle, opened fire.
It was so scary. I heard shots, broken glass, bodies.
Bartender Michael Anderson thought he was going to die.
What I can't stop thinking about is the visuals of the evening of the bodies, of the blood, and seeing a safe place turned into a war zone.
Police arrived quickly and apprehended the suspect in just over 5 minutes after the first emergency call. They say the suspect, 22-year-old Anderson Lee Aldrich, entered the club and immediately began shooting, but patrons risked their own lives to stop him.
At least 2 heroic people inside the club confronted and fought with the suspect, and were able to stop the suspect from continuing to kill.
The FBI has joined the investigation. The shooter's motive hasn't been determined, but investigators are looking into whether this was a hate crime. Prosecutors are promising justice will be served.
Actions taken to strike fear in specific communities will not be tolerated in our community.
Colorado has been the site of some of America's most notorious mass shootings, including Columbine High School in 1999, an Aurora movie theater in 2012, and a Boulder grocery store last year. This city has had its share of mass violence, too.
Colorado Springs is once again in mourning. Our hearts go out to the victims and their families who are bearing the weight of this horrific tragedy.
For the LGBTQ community, this tragic event brings back nightmares of the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016 that left 49 clubgoers dead. The Club Q massacre was America's 6th mass shooting in November alone. Another city trying to make sense of such a senseless act. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
China is sticking with its zero COVID strategy despite public outcry. The government's determined to wipe out infections through lockdowns, quarantines, and mass testing. Cases there are surging, though today China reported its first death from COVID-19 in nearly 6 months. The victim is an 87-year-old man from Beijing, where more strict measures are again being imposed. People there and in other cities with rising cases are being told to stay at home. World leaders at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt have finally reached a deal to help smaller nations bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. After days of tense negotiations that almost collapsed, nearly 200 countries have agreed to create a loss and damage fund. It will compensate poorer nations with a smaller carbon footprint that have been battered by climate disasters. The summit fell short of any new commitments on phasing out fossil fuels or cutting back global emissions. The cleanup's only just begun in Buffalo, New York, from that monster snowstorm there. People are digging out after almost 2 meters of snow blanketed Buffalo and surrounding cities. Blowing snow is still pounding other parts of western New York State, but the worst seems to be over. The historic lake-effect snowstorm created chaos on the roads, and it's linked to at least 3 deaths. Donald Trump is snubbing Twitter. Coming up, why the former president is saying thanks, but no thanks to Elon Musk. Plus, happy birthday, Mr. President. The age-old question Joe Biden is now facing. The Green Party has two new leaders tonight, and one is a very familiar face. Elizabeth May will take the helm again, but this time she will co-lead the party with Jonathan Pedno, a former human rights worker. The pair won yesterday's leadership race, succeeding Annemie Paul, who resigned last year after a tumultuous tenure that only lasted 10 months. May led the Greens from 2006 before she stepped down in 2019. The Emergencies Act Inquiry is heading into the home stretch. For the past few weeks, more than 60 witnesses have testified, offering their thoughts on whether the federal government overstepped by invoking the act to stop the convoy protests that crippled Ottawa. Our chief political correspondent David Akin gives us a recap of the key testimonies and looks ahead to this week when the PM will be in the hot seat.
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau knew his government was making a controversial decision last winter, giving law enforcement agencies sweeping, never-before-used powers to clear protests in Ottawa and elsewhere that had started as anti-vaccine mandate demonstrations but had morphed into something bigger and, in the view of some officials, something more dangerous.
The convoys were feeding off of each other, that they were causing significant economic instability, that the violent rhetoric was increasing rapidly and exponentially.
As the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jody Thomas was one of the most influential voices advising Cabinet to invoke the Act. She testified at the Commission that that was the right call.
We needed to take swift and decisive action to bring this national crisis to an end.
But her view was not shared by all. The Ontario Provincial Police, for example, said the protests could have been cleared without either of the federal or provincial Emergencies Acts.
In my humble opinion, we would have reached the same solution with the plan that we had without either of those pieces of legislation.
Evidence has emerged that RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki thought invocation of the federal act was premature, that not all tools in the toolbox, as she put it, had been used. That said, she testified that the powers given police did help.
Those authorities ended up to be useful with the plan.
Protesters themselves have been commission witnesses, and not surprisingly, they think the Trudeau government overreached.
I never had an agenda. I literally just wanted to help some truckers drive across Canada and stand in front of Parliament with some signs. That was literally what I had envisioned.
The first politician to testify at the commission this week will be Bill Blair. He's the former Toronto police chief who is the Minister of Emergency Preparedness.
I'm not here to debate with you.
He will be one of 8 cabinet ministers, including the Prime Minister, who will take the witness stand before the commission renders its verdict. And it's a verdict it must give to the House of Commons no later than February the 20th. Farah.
David Akin in Ottawa. Thank you, David. Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, says he will reinstate Donald Trump's Twitter account, but the former U.S. president says he's not interested. The snub comes after a Twitter poll by Musk showing the majority was in favor of Trump's return. Trump was banned from the social media site for inciting violence 2 days after his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. Trump says he'll be sticking with his own platform, Truth Social. The World Cup kicks off in Qatar. Ahead, the ugliness marring the beautiful game. Today was the day soccer fans around the world have waited for. The 2022 FIFA World Cup has finally kicked off in Qatar with much excitement, though not everyone feels the same way. The controversial host nation has been widely condemned for its poor human rights record and its harsh laws against LGBTQ+ people. There are also reports thousands of migrant workers have died preparing for the games. In response, many pubs in Germany are boycotting the competition. They won't show any matches. And popular musicians like Dua Lipa and Shakira have refused to perform for the competition. Now, despite all the criticism, soccer's biggest tournament will go on, and fans still have a lot to watch for, especially as the Canadian men's soccer team makes its first appearance at the World Cup in more than 30 years. Joshua Cloak, a writer from The Athletic, has been following the team very closely. In fact, he just released a book about them called The Voyagers. I spoke with Joshua earlier today as he reports on the ground from Qatar. I know you just came back from practice, and we're going to talk about that in just a sec, Joshua. But first, I want to ask you, given all the controversy surrounding this World Cup in particular, what's the mood like on the ground?
Yeah, I would say the mood is kind of changing day to day. I've been here for about a week now, and as of last week, you probably outside of the signage, which is everywhere, you wouldn't know that there's a World Cup here. But just day by day, more and more fans have started to show up. You can't walk throughout the Souk Waqif, which is the big market here, the big outdoor market, and not see pockets of fans. Pockets of fans from Senegal chanting, pockets of fans from Mexico walking and chanting. So slowly, I would say day by day, it's starting to feel more and more like a World Cup. Obviously, with today's first match, it's obviously here. It's very much here. But in terms of the mood and the controversies surrounding this World Cup, look, you can't have a conversation without a fellow journalist here without talking about it, and I think that's completely normal. But I guess as more and more games happen today, there was just one game, but as we get to the point where there's multiple, sometimes 4 games a day, it will certainly feel like a proper World Cup, and I think anticipation then will start to grow and grow.
Well, anticipation is building for Canadian fans. I know, as I mentioned, you just came back from practice. Are our Canadians men's players ready?
I would think they're more than ready, right? They're one of the last teams to kick off. They don't kick off until the 23rd. And when they do, they play Belgium, which is literally one of the best teams on the planet. What's interesting about this men's national team, it is their first World Cup in 36 years. And a lot of times when teams go to the World Cup, either for the first time or the first time in a long time, they have very, very kind of tempered expectations. This Canadian team, they finished top of the group in CONCACAF. They believe they can compete and make some real noise here. I asked Jonathan David, Canada's star striker, I said, can you beat Belgium? And the first words out of his mouth were, of course. And his rationale was on any given day, any team can beat any other team. So I would think it's fair to call this Canadian team very confident right now. They were, bolstered by the addition of Alphonso Davies, who arrived with the men's national team a few days ago after staying in Munich to continue to rehab an injury. So, yeah, I would think confidence is very, very high within this men's national team right now.
Joshua Cloak from The Athletic joining us from Qatar. Thanks, Joshua.
Thank you.
And from the World Cup to the Grey Cup, Regina is buzzing with CFL fans tonight as the Toronto Argonauts battle the Winnipeg Blue Bombers for this year's championship.
Argos! Go Bombers! It's great to be repping the Bombers here, but nobody puts on a party like prairie folk.
Crowds have taken over Saskatchewan's capital, where there's fierce support for the Rough Riders, who missed out on this year's final. Winnipeg won in 2019 and 2021. 2020 was cancelled because of the pandemic. Toronto won the cup in 2017. Next, Joe Biden celebrates a milestone birthday and breaks a record. As his critics ask, how old is too old to be president? It's been a busy weekend for the American president, but not because of work. Joe Biden's granddaughter got married yesterday at the White House, and the family is gathering again today for another celebration, his birthday, and it's a milestone. Biden is now the first sitting U.S. president to turn 80. As Mike Armstrong reports, critics wonder if the oldest commander-in-chief is too old.
Well, it's good for all of us to be together.
Joe Biden is now, with this birth date, 16 years past his life expectancy. When he was born in 1942, American men were supposed to live on average to just 66 years old. Now 80, Biden has said it's totally legitimate for voters to question his age, although some of his fellow octogenarians find it offensive.
I think the satire about him and the sneering at him is ageism.
He doesn't appear confused at all to me, as I've read. He seems fine.
What do they want to do, a 21-year-old? You want to get a Gen Zer?
Well, politics are a popularity contest, and Biden has to convince voters he's got the vitality for the job. There's a reason he tends to do that little jogging move.
For politicians who are on the older side of the spectrum, they do have to be able to persuade voters that they can do the day-to-day work, that they have the energy and the capacities.
Well, that was a challenge for Biden 2 years ago when he was elected at 77. It's going to be a bigger challenge 2 years from now if he runs again at 82. A recent poll found 70% of Americans think Biden is too old to work in government.
I am concerned that someone well into their mid-80s serve as president. I can't think of a more demanding job.
You know, as a nation.
Health-wise, some experts have called Biden a super-ager. It's a term for someone who stays healthy and efficient into their 80s and 90s. He still exercises, and the medical records that have been released are positive. But Biden today isn't quite the Biden of just a few years ago.
His gait is slower. He is a little more hunched over, so he's showing his age.
Good.
Biden has said he'll speak to his family over the holidays about whether to run for a second term. He'll announce his plans early next year. But for now, there's no big birthday celebrations, just a family brunch. Some have said so as not to remind the voting public just how old he is. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
One man who will never step aside is Santa Claus. And today, a long-standing tradition was held in his honor. After a pandemic hiatus, the Santa Claus Parade returned to the streets of downtown Toronto. It's Canada's longest-running Santa Claus Parade, which started in 1905. That's Global National for this Sunday night. On behalf of our entire crew, thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.